Good afternoon, brothers and sisters, friends and comrades. Welcome to the MUA Jobs Embassy on the lawns of Parliament House, Canberra. This afternoon we have a few speakers with us, and we would like to start by acknowledging the land on which we meet, the Nungamrai people from the Ngunnawal Nation. And Matilda, would you like to join us, please? Matilda House.
Thank you very much. Today is very important for everybody, because what we need is to have a certainty over what we're here today for, and that is giving everybody a fair go. And yeah, you can clap to that. And what's the best thing about it? People have come here and they've travelled a long way to make sure that nobody is going to miss out. And I really believe that governments have just got to really get their act together and start talking about this mob here, the Maritime Union. That's it, isn't it? Yeah. And Brendan, hello.
Hi there.
Yeah. And of course we have the Shadow Minister here as well. You are the Shadow Minister? Yeah.
For the time being.
For the time.
Happy to be.
Yeah.
Upwards.
But I want to welcome you here to the land of my ancestors, and I really appreciate being asked here today by these wonderful people to give you a welcome to the land of the Ngambri people of the Ngunnawal speaking. And I do welcome you here, and please, I really respect what you're doing here today, and I hope that you will return that respect to us as well by walking on our country. Thank you very much. And have a good day.
Thank you, Matilda. I would like to introduce Brendan O'Connor, who is the opposition spokesperson for Industrial Relations. Thanks, Brendan.
Thanks very much. Good on you, Brendan. Thank you. It's great to be here with friends. Can I just say there are Labor colleagues that are currently stuck in the chamber because of potential divisions. They may be coming along. I see Matt's managed to get here. Thanks, Matt. And there'll be others, no doubt, because this is really a very important thing you do to restore the Jobs Embassy outside the front of the Federal Parliament. Because whatever policy is announced by the government, you can be sure that there will be no consideration for workers in this country. We now have 2 million Australian workers who are either underemployed or unemployed. We have growing casualisation of our labour market. We have systemic corruption in workplaces that have not been redressed by this government, whether it be dealing with labour hire, whether it be dealing with the franchising model, which has ripped off over $100 million from 7-Eleven workers, whether it's indeed dealing with so many manifestations of exploitation in the labour market, not one thing that has been dealt with by the Turnbull government. Because in their heart of hearts, they have no concern for workers in this country. So it's absolutely vital that the union movement of this country and the Labor Party stand up for workers. And that's what I'm here today to do, on behalf of Bill Shorten and the Labor caucus, to say to you that we are with you, to fight against the cuts of this government, to fight against the anti-worker legislation. If you look at the course of the last few years, every effort in the industrial relations space that's been considered by this government has been to attack organised labour or workers generally. They have used the powers of the state and tens of millions of dollars of taxpayers' money to attack the union movement. Now we need to resist this. Without unions in workplaces across this country, this is not a democratic country. Without unions representing workers in this country, we're going to see the continuation of inequality, which at the moment is at a 75-year high. We need a vibrant, vitalised union movement working hand in hand with the Labor government federally to introduce the laws that are required to deal with these challenges, to make sure that workers matter in this country, to make sure that we redress the unfairness in this country, the fact that we have the 0.1% of our citizens owning so much of this country's wealth. Now we look to America and see what has happened there. The growing inequality. We see the hollowing out of the middle class. We see tens of millions of working class people in that country working full time below the poverty line. That can happen here. And indeed, that would be the wish of the current government, because their view, their mantra, is to have a easy to hire, easy to fire, low wage society. That's their number one goal. And it is people here today and the people you represent and the unions across the country that can prevent this from happening. So we have a lot to do, friends. We have a lot to do, but it will start with our response to the budget. But you can be assured of this: whatever efforts they will make to seem Labor light in areas of education or in areas of health, they cannot ever introduce laws that will protect and provide opportunities for working people. That is not in their DNA. They're not interested in doing that. So they understand that they might be taking a hit politically as a result of some of their positions, and they are trying to now misrepresent their goals and their aspirations to make this country less equal, less fair, and we need to do something about it. Now, I've spent quite a lot of time talking to workers and unions about what's happened in recent years, and no one's pretending some of the challenges of globalisation and automation are easy. And Labor's not pretending we have every answer to every problem. But I can give you this assurance: we're going to do everything we can to protect the interests of workers and finding solutions to some of those challenges. Now, what we can't have in this country is a government that aids and abets shocking behaviour to workers. Workers on Australian vessels being frog-marched off their own workplace to be replaced by foreign crews. That is unacceptable in this country. It should never have happened, and it happened with the aiding and abetting by the Abbott-Turnbull government, and we should condemn them for that. We cannot allow people to be placed in situations where their life is in danger because of bad health and safety practices. And the only response by the government is to attack the unions that are trying to redress the health and safety matters. That cannot continue in this country, and we have to redress that. We have a government that is attacking its own workforce. If you want to have any idea about a government's intentions, look to what they do with their own workforce. They have been starving the public sector workers of this country of a wage increase for the last 3.5 years, expecting them to accept removing rights at work, removing rights of delegates, removing, for example, enforceable provisions like domestic violence leave out of their enterprise agreements, otherwise they won't give them a wage increase. Well, to the credit of the CPSU, they fought and fought and fought this government. But it says something about a government that is so mean-spirited, so unreasonable, so unfair, so callously disregarding its own workforce that there needs to be redress. And indeed, again, only a Labor government can provide that. So I want to pay tribute to the unions that have re-established this Jobs Embassy. I can assure you I and my colleagues will be down here on any occasion you ask us to come, on any matter it might be, whether it's in the maritime industry or the construction industry or the health industry or any other sector of our economy or our labour market. Because we want to say to you that we cannot win this election without the labour movement. And we want to win this election because we do not want to see this country destroyed and this country become less fair. You know what? Fairness cannot be a brand name. Fairness is not a marketing tool. That's what Malcolm Turnbull thinks it is. The only bloke who ever gets excited about banks is Malcolm Turnbull. I mean, as I said in the Parliament recently, he's the shop steward of banks. All he cares about is the banking industry. That's why he resists the Royal Commission into that sector. But we know that the Australian people think it's unreasonable and unfair for workers to be treated the way they've been treated. And I believe that we can prosecute that argument effectively and win the next election. But as I say, it cannot be done without the very hard efforts of every worker, every delegate, every official, every Labor supporter and voter in this land. It's never easy to win an election. We've done it 3 times since World War II coming into office. It's a pretty hard thing to do. But what I do know is it can never happen without the Labor movement standing together. So I want to finish by saying thank you very much for being here today to continue to fight for the rights of workers in this country. We'll stand by you. We'll be with you all the way, and let's make sure we go and win the next election. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Brendan. We are joined today by many workers that are affected by what's going on at the moment. Behind me, we do have crew members of the MV Portland, the CSL Melbourne, the Coral Knight. We have workers from the Appin Mine Colliery. We have workers from the Carter Holt Harvey and Myrtleford. We've got workers from the the Fletcher insulation dispute. There is so much going on. There's so many workers hurting, and to talk about what exactly is going on right now is ACTU President Jed Carney.
Thanks, Michelle, and I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects. The mighty MUA. I want to congratulate them for once again coming down here in a very important week and setting up the Jobs Embassy and the Workers Embassy. Because nothing can measure a government or how a government reacts other than budget week. And budget week and federal budgets should be all about priorities. And this government, budget after budget after budget, have made it incredibly clear that their priority is not the workers of this country. Shame. Every time we see a budget, it pushes back more and more the living standards of workers, the rights of workers, and jobs and our social safety net, bit by bit, are disappearing or being torn apart. Jobs and a decent social safety net should be the absolute centre of every federal budget in this country. What is the centre of this government's budget is clearly, as Brendan said, big business. Trust me, multinational corporations do not need a single cent of our tax dollars. They can manage on their own. In fact, they could start by paying a little bit of tax, the tax that they should pay. That is what this budget should be focused on, making multinational corporations pay their fair share of tax and making sure that taxation is spent on delivering decent, secure, good quality jobs for the workers of this country and making sure that our social safety net is stronger than ever and delivers for the people of this country. You know, the MUA, they are no stranger to being attacked by Conservative governments. From their very inception, they know what that fight is. And the government comes back at good, strong unions like the MUA, like our construction unions, because they are strong. And all the other unions that stand up for their workers and fight hard for decent jobs and pay rises know what it's like to be vilified and attacked by a government that doesn't care about workers. Well, the ACTU cares about workers. Unions care about workers. The MUA does. And they have fought off every single attack. And them coming here today and setting up the embassy once again and drawing on the support of all the entire union movement shows that they are up for the fight again. And we are not going to stand by and see a government bit by bit send our jobs offshore. We will not see a government that allows Australians to be sacked so that exploited foreign workers can come in and work for $2 an hour. We are not going to stand by while this government allows our legal institutions to prosecute and fine workers thousands and thousands of dollars simply for exercising what should be a legal right to strike and to fight and stand up for their jobs. That is the government that we have here, where everyday people are having their rights at work stripped away. We have fought this fight before and we have won massive gains, and we will fight this fight again, because that is what trade unions do. We look after our members, we look after each other, we stick together. And I congratulate the MUA for coming down here on Budget Week, this incredibly important week, and reminding us who a government should be standing up for, who they should be fighting for. It's decent jobs that give a decent pay, that protect people when they're sick, that give them a decent holiday, that allow them to care for their loved ones when they need to, that can actually put a roof over their head. Decent jobs and a good social safety net is what should be the centre of this government's budget. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you, Jed, and we are proud and honoured that the CFMEU have joined us today, and I'd like to welcome the National Secretary of the CFMEU, Michael O'Connor.
Thanks very much, and I'll start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we're having this meeting and pay my respects to the elders past and present. I feel like I should be turning around and talking to the people here, the people from the MV Portland and the workers here. Dave, our delegate Dave, who's sacked for a 10-minute protest. I just want to tell the workers here, the rank and file members of the unions here, you inspire us, you make us want to work harder, you inspire our members. When we tell the story about the crew of the MV Portland and what they did to fight for their jobs, it inspires every single one of the 110,000 members of the CFM when we tell that story. When we tell the story of the people of Fletcher's been locked out for over 70 days now, I think, going on to 80 days. It inspires workers across this country. We talk about the workers at Myrtleford, locked out now for 3 weeks. It inspires other workers. And that's important. Every single dispute, it's not workers fighting for themselves, it's workers fighting for everyone. Every stand is a stand for everyone. Every battle is a battle for the future of this country. What we need is more battles. We need more workers standing up. And what I'm here to say to you, particularly, to want to acknowledge your efforts and what you do and how you inspire us, but to make the pledge on behalf of 110,000 members. It's just as we stand by our comrade from the Mining and Energy Division, there, we stand up behind the MUA, we stand up behind the AW, the CFU members, MUA members, every single unionist, we're behind you. We'll support you. We'll fight, and we'll win.
Thanks, Michael. And you're dead right, we will win. Next up, we have the new ACTU Secretary, Sally McManus.
I want to pay respect to the traditional owners of the land and their elders, past and present. I've got a message for Barnaby Joyce. Why isn't he standing up for people in regional Australia? And when I say standing up for people, I'm talking about their jobs. There's unemployment in regional Australia now that's a national disgrace, especially amongst young people. Young people face situations in places in regional Queensland and actually throughout our country where unemployment's now up over 30% for them. What type of future do those young people face? Why isn't Barnaby Joyce standing up and yelling from the rooftops that this is the #1 issue that everyone needs to listen to and his government needs to act on? Well, he's not, because he doesn't seem to care. Any announcement today about infrastructure, about jobs, what's he been doing? Sitting on his hands for the last 4 years while these communities have been ravaged with unemployment. They've let jobs go, they've encouraged jobs to go, and they do nothing about the issue of casualisation. And on the issue of casualisation, we now have a situation where 40% of our workforce are casual, or they're on ABNs, or they've been contracted out to labour hire companies. That means 40% of the workforce that don't know what it's like to have a paid sick day or a paid annual leave day. And this is the future that's facing our young people right across the country, not just in regional areas. Why isn't Malcolm Turnbull even prepared to mutter the word casualisation? I've never heard him even say it. Yet it's the day-to-day life of average Australians now because of their inactivity. And what situation faces our young people? Not only do they face record unemployment at the moment, they face a penalty rates pay cut of $70 a week on average come the 1st of July, unless the Turnbull government takes action on that. That's a real wage cut for people who can't afford it and don't deserve it. Plus, they're having their university fees increased as a result of this budget. We've already seen the active destruction of our TAFE system, the privatisation of it, the contracting out to dodgy providers. We've seen apprenticeships halved since 2012. Apprenticeships and traineeships halved since that time. What future do they face? And young people, even the idea of trying to get a house is no longer a realistic dream for so many. Now, is this the type of Australia that we want? It's not the type of Australia we want. And the reason why we're in this situation is because of active decisions made by our government and the fact that our laws that once protect Australians, which once made Australia fair, are no longer strong enough. They're no longer strong enough in the workplace, they're no longer strong enough in our communities. As was mentioned, 678 of Australia's profitable companies don't even pay 1 single cent of tax.
Bloody joke.
So the rules need to change. Working people need stronger rights, and they need stronger rights, and we've seen this happen too down in Victoria with the crew of MV Portland. How is it fair in our country that a group of workers can be told to hand over their jobs to workers earning $2 an hour? That's where we're at, $2 an hour. And what did those workers do? Well, they stood up and they fought back. They fought for those jobs, not just for themselves, but for the next generation, so that they'd have seafaring jobs as well. That's what they did. Now, a lot of those guys are now unemployed, or they're struggling in casual work because that's all you can get these days. And what is our government doing about that? They're chasing them with fines. They want to fine them over $10,000 each for standing up and fighting for their jobs. Well, if we don't have an Australian union movement that's prepared to stand up and fight for jobs, who will? No one else will. It'll only be us. So the laws need to change so that they're tipped back in favour of working people to counter the fact that corporations now have far too much power, as we are seeing in Fairfax, with the Fairfax workers who are now also on strike in a situation where they're standing up to the powerful, not just for their jobs, but for democracy. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sal. Last but not least, our MUA National Secretary, Paddy Crumlin.
Thanks. Well, I don't know about you, it's heating up now. It's cold this morning. I'm shedding clothes like an onion sheds layers. Look, I want to... That's right. I'll get down to my underpants. This was a company that was owned by BHP a year and a half ago. Just off BHP, big-hearted people we used to call them. 100 years of iron boats there were, now gone, shedded. Now you've seen what they've done overseas, their environmental record. We know what they're doing with tax. I mean, this is the future, isn't it? So they get rid of a company. The company can't afford to wash a coal miner's overalls. No laundry. So they turn up for 10 minutes in their underpants, as you do, you know, to prove a point. And what comes down? The Ombudsman comes down and sues them. Now that's the sort of Australia we live in. BHP there, Ombudsman over there, and a coal miner in his underpants over there because he can't get his clothes washed. Now I want to recognise the traditional owners of the land. Wonderful, Matilda, to meet you. One of the things about getting a bit long in the tooth, I remember, Matilda would remember this, even though she's much younger than me, that there was a 10 embassy down in front of Parliament House in the early 70s about justice and reconciliation. Gary Foldy, people like Gary Foldy, Chicka Dixon, who was also a member of the MUA in those days, Waterside Workers Federation, Terry O'Shane, many great Australians, who sat there and demanded the right for reconciliation and to have some justice. So we're doing the same here in this 10 embassy after all of these years. We're standing on this land, and I want to recognise traditional owners of the land because the local mob let us. Coppers didn't let us. Parliament didn't let us. The local mob let us because they stand up for Australian values, just not their own justice values, justice for all Australians, the right of all Australians working and men to work. I want to recognise those and their elders past and present. Look, it says it all, doesn't it? That you can be, if you're in your home in the middle of the night and someone came and dragged you out of your bunk, dragged your kids out of their bunk and threw them out on the street, what would you do? You'd say, oh, that's the Landlord Act. That's okay, I've been emptied out. Or would you say, like any other fair-minded Australian, that's not good enough? When a seafarer goes to sea in this country, war or peace, 1 in 8 merchant seafarers died in the Second World War. When we celebrate Anzac Day the other day, don't forget the service people that gave their lives in the Merchant Navy in this country, under the Australian flag, under the red duster. Don't forget those things. They are embedded in our consciousness and the sort of country we want to live in. And so the reward for them, after all of those years, when they're at sea, that's their home. They eat there, they communicate with each other there, they have cultural values there. They are able to engage around their work and live a full life 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, sometimes month in, month out. So when you come to port and someone comes and drags you out of your bunk at 2 o'clock in the morning because they want to replace you with a foreign sea, nothing wrong with those foreign seafarers. Indians, they didn't know anything about it. No one told them. They were in the dark. They were brought in a clandestine fashion, all under the watch of this government and DOTAR's the regulator that allowed it to happen, and marched up the gangway with thugs, you know, with their security thugs with a big flashlight, the Armalite flashlight banging in their hands, too many of them, and dragged these guys, another underpants story, dragged these guys out of their bunks in their underpants. What is it with this government and underpants? Jesus Christ, you know, they should put the bloody underpants on their head. That's what I reckon. See, this is not good enough. We have to stand up for our rights. This is fundamentally about the sort of Australian that we want to live in. Do we want an Australia where BHP can walk away from merchant seafarers, dump their steel, now iron ore going out of the joint, chock-a-block, coal going out of the joint, chock-a-block? What do? Don't want to pay tax. Let's move to Singapore. Let's go somewhere else. This is the sort of Australia we want to live in. This is the sort of Australia that exists. This is the sort of Australia that's going to sustain you and me and my family and my grandchildren, my granddaughters. This is the sort of Australia that we want to just stand on the sideline and let go. Well, it's not. They say Malcolm Turnbull's got all of these wonderful business skills, so he's got to be a political leader because he's got so much money. Think about having so much money. Your peer group is a bunch of other people with a shitload of money, and they don't really know what's going on the ground. They don't know what it's like to be a young university student that is relying on education, a tertiary education, and even then they may not get a home because of the speculation, because of the inability to deal with that sort of speculation, the thing that's driving the banks, because they don't want to get in the way of this whole polarisation of wealth within this country. Now, it's not a polarisation of wealth that spreads itself across the middle class and across working men and women. Working men and women have been dragged out of their bunks on the Portland for no other reason that they pay tax. They get an Australian wage negotiated by their union legally over a long period of time as reconciliation of not seeing their families, working 7 days a week, working almost unlimited overtime. Not one day was lost in industrial action on the Portland over nearly 38, 40 years. Not one day. So what's the reward of that? The Ombudsman. These guys, you pick them out and have a talk to them afterwards. These guys, many of them haven't worked since. Because the Portland is only the tip of the iceberg. Another ship gone, another ship gone, another ship gone. Are the trades gone? No, the trades are still going between Australian ports. The trades are still competing with road and rail. The trades are part of a domestic infrastructure. The trades isn't a foreign industry. It's not an export industry. It's not an import industry. It's a domestic industry. And so why shouldn't Australian workers have a right to work in their own domestic industry? And why should they be dragged out of their homes and persecuted because they are in a strong union and they find their voice? Why should they be chased by the Ombudsman? The Ombudsman, I mean, WTF, the Ombudsman. The Ombudsman doesn't give a rat's ass about all of these seafarers round and round the coast with no MSIC card. We don't know where they come from, no background, no taxation, often murdered. We've had murders, they come and go, no one gives a bugger rat's ass in the federal coppers about it. There's this whole blanket industry in Australian waters competing with road and rail. The Ombudsman doesn't give a flying what's-his-name about that. But what he cares about is that people stood up and said, it's not right to take my job. If the job goes, if the industry shuts down, fair enough. Alcoa is still running that ship. Alcoa is still earning money off that refinery down there. Alcoa relies on the Victorian taxpayer to carry their energy bill. Alcoa built the business on subsidisations, both state and federal. Alcoa's got a responsibility to employ Australian workers under Australian conditions and terms and conditions. That's their responsibility. Same as it's BHP's responsibility to pay tax and to have miners that can not dump the company when it goes, not pay tax. What are they going to do in Brazil now? You know, if it suits them, well, let's dump the water there. Oh, Jesus, a bit of a slip up there. Better sack those managers. What's it say about the governance in this country? ESG. You know, and now what's happening to BHP, the big-hearted people? Broken Hill Proprietary Limited was going to be taken over by a hedge fund 4 days ago, devalued. That's the sort of Australia we want. This company that was able to take the coal, take the iron ore, build the steel, build the nation, provide employment, get us through 2 world wars. This is an industry where there's nothing now but iron ore, and they want to move it offshore and pay no tax. They don't want to have added value. They don't want to have industry policy. They don't want to reserve their gas. They don't want to build jobs and industries in this country. They don't want to look to the future. They don't want to provide for the future. Now, budget night's a housekeeping night. In my house, not too good at it, you know. Most working men and women and their families battle to make ends meet, particularly when they're in precarious work or casual work. Well, this is housekeeping night tonight. And what we expect in this country, this government, to act on behalf of all Australians, just not the elite, just not the few, just not the chevrons that refuse to pay their tax, and it's taking us to our High Court so they don't have to pay tax. Alice in Wonderland stuff. Everything the small is now big. Everything the big is small. It is absurd. And this government has a responsibility tonight to act for the redistribution of wealth, to act in a way that builds industry, to act in a way that doesn't encourage tax minimisation and tax avoidance, and ensures it so that Australians can get a university degree, so that we can have an ability to have a house, so that we can go forward in retirement into infirmity and sickness, and a guarantee that this country will nurture us because we have given our working lives for this country. Now, that's a political challenge. If they don't want to run this country, they should get the bloody hell out of there and let some people in there, some real Australians that want to. Let's stand up for the right to work in this country. Let's stand up to the right to pay tax and have it come back into our communities and in our homes in a way that builds functionality and doesn't create dysfunction. Let's put our hands up for a government on behalf of all Australians, just not a government that's shown it only works on behalf of a very, very few. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to announce on behalf of the ACTU that the MV Portland workers are becoming emblematic of the fight for jobs in our country and emblematic of how much our government not only doesn't care, but would go about injuring them and their livelihood for standing up for Australian jobs. Given that that's the case, the ACTU will be calling on the CEO of Alcoa to a high-level meeting to discuss this situation. Thank you.